Stop for a second. Just stop whatever you are doing and look down at your legs. Are your feet cold in the morning when you wake up? Do your calves feel heavy and tired after just a short walk? Is there a dull, aching pressure in your lower legs that was not there 5 or 10 years ago? If any of that sounds familiar, then what I'm about to share with you today is going to matter. A lot. Because most people are told to take magnesium, or to wear compression socks, or to elevate their legs before bed, and those things are not completely useless. But here's the honest truth that very few doctors take the time to explain. None of those approaches are fixing what is actually broken. They are treating the symptom, not the cause. And today, I want to take you deep into the cause. I want to show you what is actually happening inside the blood vessels of your legs right now, at the cellular level, at the microscopic level. And then I want to reveal the one specific vitamin that science has now shown can actually address that root cause, not just cover it up. So let us start from the very beginning. Imagine that your entire body contains roughly 60,000 miles of blood vessels. 60,000 miles. That is more than twice the distance around the entire planet Earth. All of it packed inside one human body. All of it working right now, in this exact moment, to keep you alive. These vessels carry oxygen and nutrients to every single cell in your body. They remove waste products. They regulate temperature. They respond to stress and exertion. And the ones in your legs are doing the hardest job of all. Think about the physics for a moment. Your heart sits in your chest. Your feet can be 3, 4, sometimes 5 feet below your heart. Blood has to travel all the way down to your toes, and then fight gravity to come all the way back up. In a young body with healthy, flexible, elastic arteries, that is very manageable. The vessel walls pulse and squeeze. They push blood back up efficiently. The system works beautifully. But something changes as we cross 50, as we cross 60. And it changes quietly, invisibly, without any pain or obvious warning. That change is called calcification. Now I want you to sit with that word for a moment. Calcification. Because most people hear that word and think it just means they need to drink less milk or take fewer calcium supplements. That is not what it means at all. Calcification is when calcium, the same mineral that builds your bones, starts depositing itself inside the actual walls of your arteries, not in the blood flowing through them, inside the tissue of the wall itself. And when that happens, the artery wall loses something that it absolutely cannot afford to lose. It loses flexibility. A healthy artery wall is like a rubber band. It stretches, it contracts, it pulses with every heartbeat, it actively helps push blood forward and upward. An artery wall that has calcium deposits inside it is more like a piece of old plastic tubing. It is stiff, it is rigid, it cannot pulse properly, it cannot squeeze and push blood efficiently anymore. And your legs, which are already fighting gravity to get blood back up to your heart, now have to do that job with vessels that are increasingly stiff and unresponsive. Now multiply that across thousands of tiny arteries and arterioles feeding every muscle, every nerve, every square centimeter of skin in both your legs, and you begin to understand why people over 60 feel what they feel. The cold feet, the heaviness in the calves, the aching that settles in after standing for too long, the cramps that wake you up at night. This is not just aging, this is a specific biological process happening inside specific tissues, and biological processes can be influenced. But to understand how to influence this process, we first need to understand the most important structure in your entire vascular system, a structure so thin you cannot even see it without a powerful microscope. It is called the endothelium. Say that word slowly. Endothelium. The endothelium is a single layer of cells, literally one cell thick, that lines the inside of every single blood vessel in your body, every artery, every vein, every tiny capillary, all lined with this extraordinary single-cell layer. Now, one cell thick sounds incredibly fragile, but do not let that fool you. If you were to take all the endothelial cells from one adult human being and spread them out flat on a surface, they would cover an area roughly the size of 6 tennis courts. 6 tennis courts, all from cells that are invisible to the naked eye, all living inside you right now, and here is why this matters so much. The endothelium is not just passive wallpaper on the inside of your blood vessels. It is an active, living, biochemically sophisticated organ. The endothelium controls whether your blood vessels dilate, open up, relax, allow blood to flow freely, or constrict, tighten, stiffen, restrict blood flow like a kinked garden hose. It produces a molecule called nitric oxide, and nitric oxide is essentially the master signal for vascular relaxation. When your endothelium produces enough of it, your vessels stay open, flexible, and responsive. Blood flows freely, your legs feel warm, energized, and comfortable. The endothelium also manages inflammation inside the vessel walls. It regulates what substances can cross from the bloodstream into surrounding tissues. It prevents dangerous clotting in normal circumstances. It essentially runs the day-to-day operations of your entire circulatory system. When your endothelium is healthy, everything downstream is healthy. When your endothelium is damaged or dysfunctional, everything downstream suffers, including very visibly and very painfully your legs. Now let us talk about what actually damages the endothelium over time, because this is where most people get lost. This is where most doctors spend 30 seconds and then hand you a prescription for blood pressure medication. One of the biggest damaging forces to the endothelium, and to leg circulation specifically, is that calcification process I described earlier. Here is why it matters so much for the endothelium. When calcium deposits build up inside the artery wall, the wall becomes rigid. And a rigid artery wall creates what scientists call turbulent blood flow. Normally, blood flows through a flexible, pulsing vessel in a smooth, laminar way, like water flowing in a gentle river. Smooth flow is what the endothelium loves. Smooth flow keeps it healthy and functioning. But when the vessel wall is stiff and rigid, blood flow becomes turbulent, chaotic, swirling, creating friction against the endothelial lining. And that constant friction is chronically damaging to endothelial cells. Damaged endothelial cells stop producing adequate nitric oxide. They start allowing inflammatory substances to penetrate the vessel wall. They lose their ability to keep the vessel properly dilated and responsive. So you see, the calcification and the endothelial dysfunction feed each other in a vicious cycle. The stiffness damages the lining. The damaged lining allows more inflammation. More inflammation accelerates more calcification. And all of this is happening silently, in the walls of the vessels in your legs, while you are going about your daily life. This is why a massage feels good for 20 minutes, and then the heaviness comes back. The massage is addressing surface-level muscle tension. It is not touching the calcified, dysfunctional vessel walls underneath. This is why elevating your legs gives temporary relief. You are temporarily assisting gravity, but the moment your legs come back down, the underlying problem is still there. And this is why magnesium, while genuinely important for many things, is not the answer to this specific problem. Magnesium helps with muscle relaxation. It helps with nerve function. It can help reduce cramping. These are real benefits. But magnesium does not remove calcium that has embedded itself inside artery walls. It does not restore flexibility to calcified vessels. It does not reactivate the specific protein that your body needs to clear that calcium and send it where it actually belongs. Only one vitamin does that, and most people over 50 are significantly deficient in it. That vitamin is vitamin K2, not vitamin K1. I need to be very precise about this because the distinction is critical. Vitamin K1 is what you find in leafy green vegetables, spinach, kale, broccoli. Your body uses K1 primarily for blood clotting. It is important, but it is not what we are talking about. Vitamin K2 is a completely different molecule with completely different functions in the body, and the specific form of K2 that matters most for your vascular health is called MK7. Now, I want to tell you about the science, because this is not a trend. This is not a wellness blog theory. This is peer-reviewed, published, rigorously conducted science from major research institutions. Let me tell you about a study called the Rotterdam Study. This was one of the largest and longest cardiovascular studies ever conducted in Europe. Nearly 5,000 adults were followed and monitored for 10 full years. The researchers tracked everything: diet, lifestyle, health outcomes. And one of the things they specifically looked at was dietary vitamin K2 intake. What they found was striking. The people with the highest dietary intake of vitamin K2 had significantly lower rates of arterial calcification. They had significantly lower rates of coronary artery disease, and they lived measurably longer than the people with the lowest K2 intake. 10 years of data, nearly 5,000 people, and the relationship was dose-dependent, meaning the more K2 people had in their diet, the more protection they showed. But wait, that is just showing a correlation. What about mechanism? what is actually happening inside the body. This is where it gets truly fascinating, because there is a specific protein, a remarkable protein, that sits at the center of this entire process. It is called matrix GLA protein. Scientists abbreviate it as MGP. MGP is essentially your body's own calcium traffic officer. Its entire biological job is to patrol the walls of your arteries and identify calcium that does not belong there. And when it finds that calcium, it binds to it and signals for it to be cleared away and redirected to the bones, where calcium is actually supposed to go. Think about that for a moment. Your body already has a built-in system to prevent arterial calcification. It has a protein specifically designed to keep your artery walls clean and clear. But here is the critical problem. MGP cannot do its job unless it is activated. It exists in two forms, an inactive form and an active, functional form. In its inactive form, MGP is essentially useless. It is present in the tissue, but it cannot bind calcium. It is like a security guard who showed up to work but forgot his keycard. He is there, but he cannot do anything. For MGP to become activated, it needs to go through a specific biochemical process called carboxylation. And carboxylation requires a cofactor, a helper molecule that makes the reaction possible. That cofactor is vitamin K2. Without K2, MGP stays in its inactive form. Calcium continues to deposit in the artery walls. The walls become progressively stiffer, more calcified, less capable of doing their job. With adequate K2, MGP becomes activated. It goes to work. It finds the calcium deposits in the artery walls, binds them, and facilitates their removal and redirection to where they belong, your bones. So now you see the full picture. The same vitamin that activates the protein to clean calcium out of your arteries is also facilitating the delivery of that calcium to your bones for bone density maintenance. You are literally solving two problems with one biological mechanism: cleaner, more flexible arteries, and stronger bones at the same time. Now I want to tell you about a Dutch clinical trial that I find genuinely remarkable. Researchers took a group of adults and divided them into two groups. One group received vitamin K2 supplementation every day for 3 years. The other group received a placebo, a dummy pill. At the end of 3 years, the researchers measured something called aortic pulse wave velocity. This is a scientific measurement of how stiff your main blood vessels have become. It is essentially a measure of arterial rigidity. The placebo group showed progressive stiffening over the 3 years, as you would expect in aging adults. But the K2 group showed a measurable slowing of that stiffening process. Some participants in the K2 group showed actual improvement, a reversal of stiffness that had already developed, a reversal, not just prevention of further damage, actual improvement in vessel flexibility. Now I want to be careful here and honest. This was not an overnight dramatic transformation. It was measured, progressive, real improvement over time, and not everyone showed equal results. But the fact that a clinical trial in human beings showed any degree of reversal of established arterial stiffness using a vitamin is extraordinary. That is not something we see very often in cardiovascular science. Let me now walk you through what happens hour by hour inside your leg circulation after you start giving your body adequate K2, because I think this helps make the science feel real. In the first few hours after consuming K2, the vitamin is absorbed through your gut into your bloodstream. K2 is fat-soluble, which means it dissolves in dietary fat and needs fat present to be properly absorbed. I will come back to this important detail in a moment. As K2 enters the bloodstream, it begins traveling to the tissues, including the vessel walls throughout your legs, the femoral artery, which is the major blood vessel running down your thigh, the popliteal artery behind your knee, the smaller arteries and arterioles feeding down into your calves and feet. Once K2 arrives at those vessel walls, it begins activating the enzyme that converts inactive MGP into its active functional form. Over days and weeks of consistent K2 intake, more and more MGP throughout your vascular system becomes activated. The protein begins doing the job it was always designed to do, finding calcium that is embedded in the artery walls and facilitating its clearance. Now the artery walls begin gradually to regain some of their lost flexibility. They start becoming capable again of a proper pulse, of that gentle, rhythmic squeeze that pushes blood forward and upward against gravity. And as that happens, as the microcirculation in your legs begins to improve, the endothelial cells start responding too. They are no longer being battered by turbulent blood flow from rigid vessel walls. They start recovering function. They produce more nitric oxide. The vessels begin to dilate more appropriately. More blood flow reaches the muscle fibers in your calves. More oxygen and nutrients reach the skin and nerves of your feet. And people start noticing something different. Their feet feel warmer in the morning. That persistent, dull heaviness in the calves becomes a little less pronounced. They can walk a little further before the fatigue and aching sets in. This is not imaginary. This is real hemodynamic change, measurable improvement in how blood actually flows through the tissues of your legs. Now let us talk about where to get K2, because this is where it gets very practical. The highest natural concentration of vitamin K2, specifically the MK7 form, is found in a traditional Japanese fermented food called natto. Natto is made from fermented soybeans, and it has been a staple of Japanese diets for over 1,000 years. The specific bacteria used in fermentation produce extraordinary amounts of K2 as a byproduct. A 100-gram serving of natto contains somewhere between 800 and 1,000 micrograms of vitamin K2. That is dramatically more than any other food source on Earth. And interestingly, many researchers believe that the historically low rates of both heart disease and osteoporosis in certain regions of Japan are at least partially explained by regular natto consumption. Now, I will be honest with you. Natto has a very distinctive texture and smell. It is sticky, stringy, and has a strong fermented flavor that takes some getting used to. Not everyone loves it immediately, but if you can incorporate even small amounts, a tablespoon or two a few times per week, into your diet, you are giving your vascular system something genuinely powerful. After natto, the next best sources of K2 are fermented cheeses. And here is something very important to understand. Not all cheese contains meaningful K2. Fresh, unaged cheeses like cottage cheese, ricotta, and fresh mozzarella have very little K2. The K2 in cheese is not inherent to milk. It is produced by the bacteria during the fermentation and aging process. The longer and more complex the fermentation, generally the more K2 is present. Hard-aged cheeses, particularly Gouda and Edam, which have been studied specifically for their K2 content, contain meaningful amounts. Brie, Munster, and certain other European-style fermented cheeses also contribute usable K2. So when you choose cheese, choose aged, fermented varieties. Your cardiovascular system will benefit in ways that go far beyond what most nutrition advice ever mentions. Egg yolks from pasture-raised chickens contain moderate amounts of K2. This is an important distinction. Eggs from grain-fed chickens in industrial farming contain significantly less K2 because the chickens themselves have little access to the K1 in green plants that their bodies convert into K2. Pasture-raised chickens eating their natural diet of grass, insects, and varied vegetation produce eggs with substantially higher K2 content. If you can access pasture-raised eggs, they are worth the extra cost, not just for K2 but for their overall nutritional profile. Grass-fed butter and grass-fed beef liver both contain notable amounts of K2, again because the animal's diet of grass provides the K1 that their bodies convert to K2 in their tissues and fat. Fermented vegetables, particularly traditional sauerkraut made with live cultures, also contain small but meaningful amounts of K2 produced during fermentation. Now here is the absorption point I promised I would return to. And this matters enormously because getting K2 into your food or your supplement is only half the battle. Getting it actually absorbed into your bloodstream is the other half. Vitamin K2 is fat soluble. This means it requires dietary fat present in your gut at the same time in order to be properly absorbed. If you take a K2 supplement in the morning with just water and nothing else, very little of it will actually make it into your bloodstream. The same is true if you eat natto or aged cheese on an otherwise fat-free meal. The solution is simple but critical. Always consume your K2 sources alongside foods containing healthy fats. Aged Gouda with some olive oil and whole grain crackers. Natto alongside a meal with avocado or eggs. Your K2 supplement taken with a meal that includes olive oil, nuts, butter, or any other healthy fat source. This simple pairing can increase your K2 absorption dramatically. It is not optional. It is biologically necessary for the vitamin to reach the tissues where it needs to work. Now I want to address something directly because I get asked about this constantly. What about vitamin D3? Many people over 50 are supplementing with vitamin D3, often at the recommendation of their doctor, and this is generally a good thing. Vitamin D3 is important for immunity, for mood, for bone health, for many processes. But here is something that very few people understand about the relationship between D3 and K2. When you take vitamin D3, it increases your body's ability to absorb calcium from your gut. More calcium enters your bloodstream. In a well-functioning system, that extra calcium gets directed toward your bones, which is exactly where you want it. But if your K2 levels are inadequate, if your MGP protein is not being properly activated, that extra calcium that D3 is helping you absorb does not have a proper steering mechanism, and calcium that enters the bloodstream without proper direction can end up depositing in soft tissues, including artery walls. Some researchers now believe that high-dose vitamin D3 supplementation over long periods without adequate K2 to act as the steering mechanism may actually accelerate arterial calcification in some individuals. D3 brings the calcium in. K2 directs where it goes. They are meant to work as partners, as a team. D3 without K2 is like having a very powerful delivery truck with no driver who knows the address. So if you are currently taking D3, and many of you should be, please think seriously about whether your K2 intake is sufficient to work alongside it. What does sufficient look like? For most adults, research suggests that between 90 and 200 micrograms of MK7 form K2 daily is the range where meaningful vascular benefits have been observed in clinical studies. If you are getting K2 from natto regularly, you may already be well covered. If you are relying on aged cheeses and eggs, supplementation may make sense to ensure you are reaching those levels consistently. As for safety, the safety profile of K2 at these doses is excellent. It is a naturally occurring vitamin. Toxicity has not been observed at supplemental doses in research. It does not accumulate to dangerous levels the way some fat-soluble vitamins can. There is one important exception, however, and I want to be very clear about this. If you are on anticoagulant medication, specifically warfarin or similar blood thinners, you must speak with your doctor before making significant changes to your K2 intake. K2 interacts with the mechanism by which warfarin works. Your doctor can help you manage this safely, but it needs to be a supervised conversation. Do not skip that step. For everyone not on anticoagulants, there is really very little risk and potentially very significant benefit. Now let me bring this all the way back to where we started. Look down at your legs again. Those legs have been working for you every single day of your entire life, through every challenge, every adventure, every ordinary afternoon. They have never asked for much. And right now, inside the blood vessels of those legs, a biological process has been quietly unfolding for years. Calcium gradually stiffening the artery walls. Endothelial cells struggling to do their job in an increasingly hostile environment. Circulation slowly, incrementally becoming less efficient. But here's what I want you to really understand. This is not a one-way road. Biology responds to signals. Your body is always trying to repair, to maintain, to restore function. The MGP protein inside your artery walls is always trying to do its job. The endothelial cells are always trying to produce nitric oxide and keep the vessels open. They are not failing because they do not want to work. They are failing because they are missing a cofactor, a specific nutrient that your body cannot make on its own, and that modern diets, with their heavy emphasis on processed foods and loss of traditional fermented foods, have quietly and dramatically reduced. That cofactor is vitamin K2. Giving your body adequate K2 is not a miracle. It is not an overnight transformation. It is something more interesting and more durable than that. It is giving your body the specific tool it needs to do what it is already designed to do, to clear the calcium from those arterial walls, to gradually restore some flexibility to vessels that have been stiffening for years, to give the endothelium a better environment to function in, to let the nitric oxide flow, the vessels dilate, the circulation improve. Your 60,000 miles of blood vessels deserve the right maintenance, and now you know exactly what that maintenance looks like. Start this week. Add fermented aged cheese to your meals. Find a good source of pasture-raised eggs. If you can try natto, try it. Even a small amount regularly makes a real difference. And consider a high-quality MK7 supplement between 90 and 200 micrograms daily, always taken with a fat-containing meal. Give it time. Consistency is everything here. This is not a 2-week fix. This is a biological restoration that happens at the cellular level over weeks and months, but it does happen. And the science says so clearly. Your legs carried you here to this moment, reading these words. Now you have something real to give them back.